The sun is out. I know you noticed that. And over the last few days, spring has sprung. Well, at least the calendar says so. Does it not? It's going to be a little chilly tonight, but it's coming. It's coming. I've been away almost a week, almost to the day. I was in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. I didn't say anything this morning, but preaching at a missions conference there last week, and then I came back and went to Albany the next day, Monday and Tuesday, and so I'm just kind of landing myself. I'm getting back into things, into a routine. My wife is on vacation, so I kind of feel strange, if you know what I mean. I haven't seen my wife now in about 11 days, 11 or 12 days. That's only happened a couple times other than my military time. So I'm starting to feel a little bit like I'm missing her and a little lonely. I guess that's okay, isn't it? But Scott at the beginning of this semester, I asked Scott, I said, would you handle the life of Jacob, which is it's a pretty good chunk in the book of Genesis, as you know. So if you're here for the first time tonight and you wonder who this young man is, this is my son Scott. Scott teaches at North Star Christian Academy. His wife, Janet, is also here in the back. She's also a teacher at North Star. And Scott works as a part-time assistant to me. He helps me with things like this and many other things around the office. He still works full-time over at North Star, and he does this part-time in helping me. So he's a pretty busy guy. But he's going to be speaking tonight. He's going to be teaching and finishing up the life of Jacob. I apologize for not having more notes, but my wife is my scribe, and her being out of town, when she comes back on Tuesday this week, we'll get all caught up. I've done my work for my notes. My notes are written and proofread and all that, but she actually publishes them, puts them out in the form that you have in the notebook, and so she'll have to catch up by next Sunday, and we will be up to probably at least chapter 37 in your notes. Right now you have up to chapter 33, or you should, and we should give you at least 3 more chapters, maybe 6 more chapters. Next Sunday we'll be up pretty close to chapter 40, and we'll be starting the last major segment of Genesis. We're going to be studying the life of Joseph. Joseph probably is the greatest type of Christ in all of the Bible. So we'll be doing that starting next Sunday night. Those of you that are my credit students know I have not corrected your midterms. So I haven't been lazy. I really have been busy, but I will get the opportunity, and again, by next Sunday night, that will be done, and you'll get them. So let's have a word of prayer. We want to welcome people who may be watching. Believe it or not, we generally have more people watching on the internet than actually here in the classroom. In fact, according to Andy, I think the last time he told me, we have about 3 times as many people that actually watch this class on the internet than show up. Now, we want you to show up. We want live people in here. We don't want everybody watching on TV or on the internet. But for those of you that are tonight, welcome. We're going to get going, and let's pray together. Father, we're thankful for Jesus, thankful for another opportunity to come to open the pages of the Word of God, to study one of the most important people in all of the Old Testament, this man that is called Jacob and is called Israel. Father, I pray that you bless Scott and help him keep his wits about himself this evening and keep his thoughts organized. And then, Lord, that we would listen, comprehend, understand. And when we have an opportunity to ask questions, ask some good questions, Lord. Bless our time together, we pray, and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to introduce to you Scott Gray. Scott, you come. I've got to find my stuff and get it out of the way here, my Bible and my keys and my glasses.
All right. Good evening. Welcome back. How are you today?
Good evening.
Good evening. We usually, when I say good morning to my class at North Star, my second period class anyway, I get about a 0% response rate. So Good morning. Good evening. Thank you. So we're at about 5% now, getting better. We left off, wow, that's really loud. We left off last week with Jacob and his departure from Padan Aram, the land of Syria, which is north, if you're in geography, north of even modern-day Israel. So Jacob left Haran, Haran is the region, but Padan Aram is the area as well. But he was sent to that region by his mother because of their deceit of their father, Isaac, over the blessing, and in fear of Jacob's life. What good is the blessing if Jacob is dead? So that's kind of where we are. Jacob went, he dwelled 20 years or so with Laban, and what we learned last week was that he had wives, was deceived himself into marrying Leah first, and the irony we remember from that was pretty intense, waking up in the morning and realizing, wow, you're not the person I thought I married. Can't imagine that situation. So exciting. Then he has several children by Leah and Rachel. And then also their handmaidens, Bilhah and Zilpah, bear a couple children as well. So he grows with reference to his family. And that's in fulfillment to the promise that he receives from the Lord, that he would, that his seed, or Abraham's seed, would be as the dust of the earth. And we saw Abraham was barren. Well, obviously Sarah was barren, and then they had a son. And then Rebekah, the same thing. And then even Rachel. So barrenness plagued that family. And that's a conflict, because God's promise was that you would have a large family, and you would have a nation come out of your family. And so what we saw in Jacob was that his family grew because of the promise. Not only that, he gained wealth outside of the promised land. If you follow the trajectory of the Old Testament, Israel's in the land and they're out of the land. Then they are brought back to the land. And oftentimes, at least with Isaac and Abraham, they got wealthy outside the land and brought that back to the promised land. The same thing is true with Jacob. So he gets prosperity, blessing. He grows, and then he departs from Laban under shady circumstances, and not in the best way. But now he's heading back to the land of Canaan, which is the promised land. And so there we are, God is fulfilling his promise in that part as well. So that's where we left off. Jacob has made a treaty with Laban, and he's returning to the land with his large entourage of cattle and family and what other wealth he may have inherited and gained. But what we did learn last week, we learned the first week certainly that Jacob is a man of integrity. He has integrity issues. He has a hard time trusting God. And obviously learned that from his parents pretty well. But he's a man who has lapses in his integrity, and he's in need of transformation. If he's going to be the father of a nation, the people who make the Lord their God, as Jacob vowed as we saw last week in chapter 28, I believe. And so Jacob is a man in need of serious transformation. And of course, as a teacher, I don't know if you've ever been in this position, you always learn more than the students will ever learn in teaching your subjects. And oftentimes we have this, at least I did growing up, that all the people in the Bible were perfect, right? And that you need to be like the people in the Bible because they're perfect, and especially the really famous ones, But that's just not the case. And Jacob is a man who probably was himself a polytheist, probably worshiped the gods of the land of Canaan, because he makes God his God at Bethel, right? So clearly at that point, he wasn't his God. So he was probably a polytheist. He's a trickster, earned that name, supplanter. He's shady in his dealings with his brother, with his father, shady in his dealings with Laban in some ways. And so he's a man of mixed motives and mixed, he's doing right, but he's also growing and learning and failing, and it's all put together. And this is the Jacob, right? If we say, yeah, God, the God of Jacob is my God, and you're like, oh yeah, well that God Jacob is a great guy, but then you're like, wait a second, he had his issues, and so I take great, comfort, I guess, in knowing that we get to see the life of these individuals play out, and who are looked at as people who served God and did what God wanted, but who had to grow. They had to be transformed themselves. It's a lifelong process. And we see that even here tonight. We're going to see that especially. Jacob, even though he's got the promises, even though he's seen God work multiple times, he's still going to do things that are just like, it's not consistent with what you say you believe and who you say your God is. And we're going to see that tonight still. Even after his name is changed from Jacob to Israel, which is a very important moment, and we'll see that here. So let's get started. But take comfort in that. The spiritual life and growth as a Christian and a disciple especially, it's a process. Sanctification is a lifelong process, and we're never going to finally be there. We are always learning. And until we have an attitude where we understand that, self-righteousness becomes pretty easy to come by. But let's pick up in chapter 32 with Jacob in verse 1. He is, as I said before, he's on his way out of the land, or out of Haran, leaving Laban. He's departed, at least a 7-day journey or so from the land. He's gone quite a ways. Laban tracks him down, and God tells Laban, you better not say a good word or a bad word against this guy, because that's my guy. And Laban leaves him alone. He just wants to know where his gods are, right? Because Rachel tricked her father and stole his god, or gods. And so that's where we are. In verse 1, Jacob went on his way. So he's left Laban. And he's heading toward the promised land, to the land of his fathers. And first off, verse 1 through 3, we saw when Jacob was leaving his family, when Rebekah said, go, and his father said, go to get a wife, he's leaving because of his fear of Esau, and he's heading out of the land toward Laban. But in the middle, right, he has the meeting of God, and he has the vision of the ladder and the angels and God at the top of the ladder there. And so in the middle of that, from leaving the land where he's running from Esau and going to Laban, he meets angels. Same thing here. Now he's leaving Laban, heading back to be reunited with Esau, and he meets again angels on the way. And so Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And again, here it doesn't say it was a dream. We're left to guess here. But the word angel simply means messenger, right? And that's going to play a role here in a little bit. But he meets the angels of God again, and when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. and which means two camps or two companies. What is that a reference to? Probably a reference to the host of God, right? The angels of God, the army of God that are with him there, and then also his host, his entourage that he's traveling with. That's my interpretation of it. So there's two hosts. And what this really serves to do is to boost his morale and to show Jacob that God is going with you. God's protection is with you. We saw in Bethel the first time that God said, I will go with you. I will be with you. And I think that's what this is here. It's a reminder. The angels are a reminder to Jacob that God is going with him. God is going before him. And he's going to need it because Jacob, remember, left in fear of his brother. He left running for his life. And now he's returning to meet his brother many years later. Okay, so he meets angels or messengers on the way of God. And then what does Jacob do? He sends messengers himself. He sends angels, if you will, or messengers before him to Esau. So he sends his own men, not literally angels, but his own messengers, to his brother Esau onto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And this is south, again, south of the Dead Sea area to the east of the Dead Sea, and south of it is the land of Edom, the land of Seir. And Seir and Edom are a reminder of Esau. Seir means essentially hairy, right? They think probably because the region had lots of trees, so it kind of symbolizes being hairy. Esau himself was a hairy man. And the country of the Edomites, and that's the red, right? The red, maybe it's because the ground is red, maybe like Georgia, the dirt there is kind of reddish tint. But the earth is red, and that's where the Edomites lived. And that comes from Esau's desire for eating the red pottage that he sold his birthright for. Right? And so it kind of draws us back to that situation. So it reminds us of the trickery that played out in Jacob and Esau's life and the fear that came along with that. But again, Jacob has the promise of God's protection. Verse 4, and he commanded them, saying, thus shall ye speak unto my Lord. Now listen to that language. Thus shall ye, he says to the messengers that he's sending out, thus shall you speak to my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus. In this chapter, or at least in verse 1 through 21, Jacob says something like, refers to him, to Esau as Jacob's lord and himself as Esau's servant. So notice the deferential language here, the kind of de-elevating himself to his brother. His brother was the elder brother. But Jacob's the one who had the blessing. Rebekah's the one who was told the older shall serve the younger. Jacob's the one who received the blessing from Isaac, and he said, your brethren will bow down to you, right? And you will be their Lord. So this is irony. Jacob is calling Esau his Lord when God had said Jacob would be the Lord of Esau. And then he calls himself thy servant. And again, it was promised the blessing that Isaac gave to Jacob was that his brother Esau would be his servant and their family. And so it's a complete reversal. So what's going on here is Jacob, he's fearful, right? He's in fear. He's been given this blessing. He's been told by God that I'm going to go with you, but here he's deferential to his brother because he fears, and he doesn't know how his brother is going to respond. And this is what he says to his messengers to tell Esau in verse 4. I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen and asses and flocks, men servants, women servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord, there it is again, that I may find grace in thy sight. And the term grace there has the idea of favor, right? Jacob is going to send these animals, this cattle, as a present or a gift to Esau in order to find favor. Remember, Rachel said to Leah, "Give me your son's mandrakes." Right? Because Rachel believed that if she ate those mandrakes, it would give her favor, in a sense, and she would bear children. But the irony of all ironies, Leah immediately gets pregnant and has another child, and Rachel is still barren. So here even Jacob himself, he's still trying to control. He's still trying to manipulate and to protect himself and to ensure his future. When we learn that you can't do that. That's God's business. And so again, Jacob's fearful, and he's saying, "I'm sending you a present to find favor in your eyes." Right? He's trying to deliver himself. He's trying to do the work here that's up to God. And this term grace that we see here is going to become a pretty significant theme for the next chapter or so. And we'll see that. We'll come across that here quite often here. Verse 6, "And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, 'We came to thy brother Esau.'" And here, some time has certainly passed. They went to Esau, and now they've come back. And they say, "And also he cometh to meeteth thee." Right? And then you can imagine like the dramatic pause. Right? Think of, right? He's on stage. The servants are on stage. "Oh, Jacob's coming to meet you with 400 men," right? Yeah, with 400 men, warriors. And so imagine what that does to Jacob's mind. Right? They don't say they're coming because they're coming in peace. It just says they're coming. And what's Jacob's response? Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Esau, he cried a great and exceeding bitter cry when he heard that his brother had stolen the blessing. And now Jacob is greatly afraid and distressed at the sound that his brother's coming to meet him. And so what happens? Jacob acts. He makes a decision, all right? He assumes the worst. What does he do? He divides the people that was with him, the flocks and herds and camels, into two bands. So he divides. What did Jacob's manipulation do? What did his deceit do to his family when he left after stealing the blessing? It divided the family. What did Jacob do with Leah and Rebekah and Rachel? Because of his favor, his special favor for Rachel, divided the family. Now here he is dividing again, right? His manipulation, his trying to work things out on his own causes division rather than unification and trust that should have been there. And verse 8, "And said," this is Jacob speaking, "If Esau come to the one company," this is the rationale for dividing the people, "if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape." Right? So he's trying to plan. He's trying to plan for this terrible situation. And we learned, and again, this is a favorite phrase that I learned in seminary from one of my teachers, what God has done in the past is both a model and a promise for what he will do in the future, although he's too creative to do the same thing twice. But Jacob still hasn't learned that. God promised to protect him at Bethel. He said, "I'll be with you. I'll go with you." Right? He spoke to Laban and said, "Don't hurt Jacob." And Laban even told that to Jacob. Right? So God meets him on the way, again here in verse 1. So even though he's had all these encounters, you see Jacob is a man who has a lot of room to grow. And what does he do? He prays. He prays. Right? But notice what he does first. He acts, he makes his decision before he prays. He's got it reversed. In verse 9, "And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord," he says the covenantal name here, Jehovah, "which saidst unto me, Return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal with thee. He's talking and saying, God, look, you told me to come back. I am not worthy of the least of the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. Right? Jacob, at least he has the proper attitude. He understands coming before God. Right? He comes to God and says, look, I know I don't deserve this. I know what kind of man I am. But please, honor your word. Jacob comes humbly but boldly. And so he continues on and he says, for with my staff I passed over this Jordan. This is a reference to his earlier trip where he had nothing. He left with nothing but his staff. And now I've become two bands. He's experienced riches, blessing, and a large family. God's keeping his promises to him. And what he says is, deliver me, save me, I pray. I pray thee. As far as I can tell, this is the first time Jacob says, please. Right? He told his brother, give me your birthright. Right? And he says to Laban, give me my wives. Right? And this is the first time Jacob says, please. Oh, you know he's really hurting here, right? Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. Right? He says the hand of my brother, like God doesn't know who he's talking about, but then he says the hand of Esau, just in case God wasn't sure. It's Esau, please. For I fear him. Jacob feared God. Jacob feared Laban. Jacob feared Esau. And it's interesting. Nobody's ever recorded of saying they feared Jacob. For I feared him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. And thou saidst, and this is God, he's quoting again back to God what God has promised him, I will surely do thee good and make thy seed as the sand of the sea or the dust of the earth, as said to Abraham, which cannot be numbered for a multitude. Again, what God has done in the past is a model and a promise for what he will do in the future, though he's too creative to do the same thing twice. So Jacob prays to God and says, I trust you. Right? He's still trying to work it out himself. But he says, I trust you, Lord, and I want you to honor your word. And so he goes on, he lodged there that night, that same night, there in the wilderness, and took of that which came into his hand a present, a gift. Right? He's going to try to buy Esau's favor for Esau, his brother. Look at this gift. Wow. 200 she-goats. Apparently she-goats are called does. You can fact check that for me, but that's what I found. 20 he-goats, which are called bucks, apparently. 200 ewes, female sheep. 20 rams, male sheep. 30 milk camels with their colts, or 30 camels that are feeding colts with their milk. So they're young camels. 40 kine, or cows. 10 bulls. 20 she-asses, and 10 foals. So if you add all of this up, Jacob is going to give his brother at least 550 animals. 550 plus, because it says 30 milk camels with their colts. How many colts were there? I don't know. At least probably one for each. So he's going to give his brother 550 animals. This is incredible wealth in these days. And what the picture is here, sort of like Jacob has called his brother my servant, my Lord, or he said, I'm thy servant and you're my Lord. And now he's going to give him all this riches. This sort of signifies the blessing that Jacob was promised to Jacob. Now it's like Jacob is trying to return the blessing that he stole from his brother back to him. He's trying to make up for himself. Right? But interesting. Look at verse 16. And he delivered them into the hands of his servants. What did he pray in verse 11? Deliver me, I pray thee. And what is Jacob doing here? He's delivering presents to his brother. So who's Jacob really relying on? Is he relying on God to deliver him? Or is he relying on himself? Again, there's confusion. He's a man of mixed motives. He's a man who needs to grow, but he's God's chosen. He's like us. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants. Every drove by themselves and said unto his servants, these are instructions that he gives to his servants, pass over before me, go in front of me, put a space betwixt drove and drove. This is sort of like the behavior that Laban did when he divided the sheep for Jacob and Laban. Laban put a space of 3 days between them because he didn't trust. So it's insinuating here that Jacob doesn't trust God because he's going to put a space between them. He divides them further. He commanded the foremost, saying, when Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, whose art thou? And whither goest thou? Whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, again, you see the deferential language, they be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau. And behold, also, he is behind us. Right? There's the most ideal picture of bravery that I have seen in any sort of story, right? He's in the back. He divides everybody up, puts spaces, and he's as far back as possible, right? I don't know what is traditional for going to battle, but I know historically, right, the leaders were out front, and then the captain of the ship always goes down with the ship, right? But Jacob's in the back. He's God, I trust you, but I'm just going to, go back here for a little while and watch you work your magic, right? It's like, yeah, God, I trust you with my life, but I'll just kind of sit back here and watch it for everybody else and see how it works for them, and then maybe I'll try, right? And so commanded he the second, the third, and all that followed the drove, saying, on this manner shall you speak to Esau when you find him. And say ye moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us. Right? The deferential language comes out. And again, he repeats that he's in the back. For he said, or Jacob, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me. And afterward I will see his face. There's an interesting word because it's going to lead us into the next situation. Peradventure he will accept me. So went the present over before him, and he lodged that night in the company. In verse 20, where it says, for he said, I will appease him, that word appease is the same word that you see in Leviticus for atone. Right? So we see, even here we see these theological concepts that are going to come later after Sinai with the giving of the law. We see them here. Jacob's trying to propitiate himself. He's trying to cover himself. He's going to try to appease Esau or make atonement, right? Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. That's the Kippur is the word here. Right? And so Jacob is going to give him this gift, make atonement in order that he shall see his face. And that word face, again, is important because it kind of leads us into where we're going now. Matthew 5:8 says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Exodus 33:20 says, thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. Now here we go. Jacob's transformation. Jacob becomes Israel. This is the most important meeting of Jacob in the entire story, as far as this is sort of the climax of the story of Jacob's life. Let's go. And he rose up that night. Couldn't sleep, right? They're camping out. He rose up that night, took his two wives, and his two women servants, Bilhah and Zilpah, and his 11 sons. There's no mention of Dinah here. And passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them, the servants, wives, and sons, and sent them over the brook. Right? The Jabbok is a river slash brook slash stream, whatever. I don't know, it's shallow in places, deeper in other places. It runs east and west, and it runs down to the Jordan River. And it's sort of like here where Jacob enters the promised land. And he took them and sent them over the brook. All right, so it's shallow enough to walk over, at least on feet or maybe on an animal, and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man. And this is interesting, because this is such an important story. There's some words here that in the Hebrew sound very similar. Right? Jabak, Jacob's name is Yaakov, and wrestled is the word that sounds like Yavek. Right? Jabak, Yaakov, Yavek. So it's like these words kind of hold the story together for people in their minds. The person, the place, and what happened there. The three words start with a J, kind of tie it together. So it's a very helpful thing, at least if you speak Hebrew, but not if you speak English. Anyway, in their memory, they would have had this place, the person, and what happened there burned into their minds as they told this story. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of dawn, or the breaking of the day, or the dawn. Right? And so Jacob, this is just enigmatic. It's strange, right? It's like, okay, he's wrestling. Is this Esau that he's wrestling with? Who is this man? Right? It leaves it totally open. You have no idea what's going on. And so he wrestles the man, and when he, the man, saw that he prevailed not against him, Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh, the loins area, we would say probably the hip, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Wait a second. So, it doesn't say that he hit him really hard. It doesn't say that he, kicked him while he was down. It says he touched him. It was like, this is, the word used here is like, wait, he's wrestling a man, but this is not just a man. This is someone who can touch you and dislocate your hip. Who is this person? Right? And so if you're reading this for the first time, it's like, wait a second, this makes no sense. So he touches him, his hip is out of joint, and he said to him, the man, let me go, for the day breaketh. Well, okay, the dawn is coming, so I have to go. Do I have an appointment? Right? Breakfast is on, or what's going on here? So he says to him, let me go, for the day breaketh. And now we kind of learn, Jacob knows who this person is, who this man is. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, a supplanter, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. So the name change here is very important. Abraham in chapter 17 of Genesis, name is changed. Sarah's name is changed. Right? Here, Jacob's name is changed. You can think of other people's names and names are changed in Scripture, Paul and Saul, and so on. And so this is clearly a very important point in the life of Jacob. It's the transformation of Jacob from supplanter, from the old life to the new life, to the man who's going to be a father of a nation, and who the nation will be called after. Right? So he's not just he's just not Jacob anymore. He's Israel. And so the man who we now know is God. Hosea says the angel of God, or angel of the Lord, right? And Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee. He says, please again. This is interesting, so he's on a roll with his pleases. Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou dost ask me after my name? He's essentially saying, you know who I am. I don't have to say my name. You know me. And he blessed him there. And so just as Jacob is leaving Laban Just as he's about to meet his brother, he's in great fear. He meets this man on the way who changes his name. And it's not just a man, it's the angel of the Lord. And his name is changed. And some people might say it's Christ himself. That's one interpretation, certainly. But Hosea calls him the angel of the Lord, I believe. And so Jacob has gone from supplanter, man who doesn't have much integrity. Now he's Israel. He's a new person with a new future, with a new promise. He's reminded of the blessing that he's been given. In verse 30, and Jacob called the name of that place Peniel, which simply means face of God. And it says, and here it explains why. For I have seen God face to face. So Jacob's been in the house of God, Bethel, and now he's seen the face of God at Peniel. And my life is preserved. Some would say that the reason why he had to leave at daybreak was because Exodus 33 says you can't see God and live, right? So perhaps that's why he had to leave. But Jacob responds and says, my life is preserved because of, even though I've encountered the Lord. So Jacob has a powerful encounter with God on the way to Padan Aram, and he has a powerful encounter with the Lord on the way to meet his brother while he's headed back into the land. And as he passed over Penuel, it's just an alternate spelling, means the same thing, face of God, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. He limped along. And then we get a little introduction here to tradition in Israel's history. Therefore the children of Israel eat not the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. So Jacob, the supplanter, a man in need of transformation, at the Jabbok wrestles the angel of the Lord, which is the place of his transformation. He becomes Israel. And now Israel is a man who's been changed, but he's limping. So the picture here is that transformation comes, but it comes with wounds. It comes with lessons, hard lessons learned. Right? And that's a picture of many of our lives. Let's move on to chapter 33. Verse 1, and Jacob lifted up his eyes. Right? So it's like, in film, right? You have the camera zooming from different scene to different scene. It's like, bam, we have Jacob walking away, and the next scene, the next immediate scene, is Jacob walking, looking, and seeing his brother Esau, right? And so you can think the picturesque way of telling this story resembles much like how we use film these days. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came with 400 men. Wow. If you're reading for the first time, and you understand the story, you're like, oh boy, what's going to happen next, right? The tension is building. The tension is ripe for resolution. What's going to happen? And Jacob divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the two handmaids. As we find out next, how he orders them is important. And he put the handmaids and their children in the front. Gad, Asher, Dan, Naphtali, and Zilpah and Bilhah go first. Right? Then he put Leah and her children, her 7 children, including Dinah. And they're next, right? She's the least favored. Obviously the handmaids are a little bit less favored. Leah comes next, and her children. And then Rachel and Joseph are last, the most favored. The ones with the most grace in the eyes of Jacob come last. Assuming, and also Jacob himself is last, too, just in case. But Jacob is a changed man, remember. His name's been changed. He's Israel now. And what does he do? Before, he commanded his servants to go in front and say, Jacob's coming, and these are your presents, and he's behind us, and do that 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. But here, Jacob has a moment of courage. He has a moment of bravery. He steps up. He trusts God. He passed over before them. He went to the front. And what does he do? He bowed himself to the ground 7 times. And he came near to his brother. Why do you think he bowed 7 times? Tradition? Custom? Probably not. He bowed 7 times because he was afraid. And it's interesting, if you look in Leviticus, right, the cleansing for the acceptance, right, they had to splash the blood or the oil 7 times, right? I think, who's the guys who told to go into the river? What's his name? Haman or somebody? No, that's not Haman. What's his name? Naaman. Going to the river, I think he goes 7 times, right? So this picture of 7 times is like, I am trying to make up for what I have done. I'm trying to earn this favor. And so he bows 7 times. And he calls, remember before he called Esau his Lord. Right? It was told, right, by Isaac that his brother Esau would bow to Jacob. But here it's reversed. Jacob bows to Esau. And what does Esau do? 400 men. Jacob's got a young family, sheep. He's big. He can't really move that fast. 400 men could probably move a whole lot faster than this group of people. Esau, verse 4, ran to meet him, embraced him, fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. Whoa, surprise. I mean, that's like, wow. I'm sure Jacob wasn't expecting that. Right? When Jacob met Rachel, he kissed her in a greeting, lifted up his voice, and wept. When Laban met Jacob, he ran to meet him, embraced him, kissed him, and brought him to his house. When Esau meets him, he runs to meet him, embraces him, falls on his neck, and kisses him, and they wept. Right? So you see it builds, right, leading up to this moment. And it just totally blows your mind, right? You see Esau running to meet him, you're like, okay, yeah, he's running to meet him, he's got a sword out. No, he's got his hands out ready to embrace him. And he lifted up his eyes, verse 5, and saw the women and children, that's Esau, and said, who are those with thee? And Jacob says, the children which God has graciously given thy servant. Why he doesn't mention the wives, I'm not sure, but it's a picture of his blessing, his prosperity as the children. But again, he uses deferential language to Esau. Then the handmaidens came near, and they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Lisa also came with her children, and they bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near Rachel, and they bowed themselves. Right? I mean, sure, Esau's like, okay, enough with the bowing, please. I love you, brother. Esau is a changed man. I don't know what has happened, but he's at least gotten over the situation, and he's accepted Jacob and his family. And he said, what meanest thou by all this drove which I met, by all the animals? And he said, they are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. Right? Again, Jacob's trying to buy that which he can't buy, just like Rachel couldn't buy children with the mandrakes. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. He doesn't accept. He calls him his brother. He doesn't say my Lord, even though he was said to be the one who would call him my Lord. Keep that thou hast unto thyself. And Jacob said, nay, I pray thee. This is the first time he says please to his brother. Nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present from my hand, or at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face as though I had seen the face of God. And so we saw that Jacob met a man who turns out was the angel of the Lord. And it's almost like that meeting was sort of to like foreshadow this meeting here, right? That he's going to meet his brother, and his brother is going to accept him back. Seeing Esau's face was like seeing God's graciousness to him. But again, Jacob's trying to buy his brother's favor. And he says, take it so I could find grace. But now Jacob changes a little bit and says, well, if I have found favor, if I have, then accept this. Right? And so he says in verse 11, take, I pray thee, again, please, my blessing. And that's very important there. Take my blessing. What's he referring to? He's referring to the animals, I think. But he says, take my blessing. And that blessing is what Isaac gave to Jacob himself. It's like Jacob is trying to give the blessing back to his brother because he feels so bad. He feels so guilty. He's trying to make up for what he did. Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Esau has enough. Jacob has enough. Right? They've got enough. Jacob's trying to buy his favor, but Jacob urges him, and so Esau takes it. Right? It's just kind of like, okay, stop. All right, I'll let you pay for the meal, but I don't really want you to. But he takes it. And it's almost like Jacob is, again, trying to return that blessing. And we see here that Jacob saw the face of God and lived, and it was very much predicted, or there's very much in that Jacob would see the face of Esau and live. So God keeps his promise. He protects, again, Jacob from his worst fear. And verse 12, and he said, let us take our journey and let us go, and that's Esau. Let us go, and I will go before thee. His brother Esau has changed. Let's go back, and I'll go in front of you. Right? He's not going to go behind them, just in case they try to escape. He's going to go in front of them, and if Jacob wants to run away, he can, because he's too scared if he wants. Right? So you see that he's a changed man. He offers to lead. And Jacob said unto him, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, they're young, they're frail, and the flocks and the herds are with me. And if men should overdrive them just one day, all the flock will die. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant. Again, the deferential language. And I will lead on softly. I'll go a little bit slower, according to the pace, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure, until I come unto my Lord, unto Seir. So, Jacob, surprise, and Esau invites him to come live with him. But Jacob, he's the supplanter, remember? He's the supplanter. And so Esau says, well, okay, if you want to go slowly, then let me leave with thee some of the folk that are with me, some of the men, the warriors, the guys who came. Right? And Jacob says, oh, what needeth it? It's not necessary. Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. Right? It's just not necessary. All I want is I want me to have favor with you and we're good. That's all. I don't want any more from you, Esau. Well, what does he really want? What does he really want to do? Jacob knows that he's not going to Seir. Jacob knows he's heading somewhere else. But he doesn't want to anger his brother. He doesn't want to upset his brother. He doesn't want to offend him anymore. So he tells him, well, I'll just go on slowly. Right? So Jacob begged Esau to accept the gift. And finally, Esau does. And Esau begs Jacob to come with him, and I'll let men go with you. And Jacob says, no. He says no to his brother. Right? And I see this as Esau offering the men so they could help guide them and help protect and help take care of the sheep as they move along and the cattle and so on. But Jacob's like, nah, I don't need it. I've got enough. But there's a reason why. Verse 16, and so Esau returned that day on his way unto Seir, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth, or Sukkot. Succoth. Sukkot. Esau went south. Jacob went west. Wait a second. I'll go slowly. I'll meet up with you in Seir. Oh, wait, you're going the wrong way, Jacob, right? So Jacob knows he's not going with his brother, but he lies to his brother. He supplants his brother again. Says, yeah, I'll meet up with you. And he knows he's not gonna. So we kind of see the old Jacob here again. And so Esau returned on his way, and Jacob went on his way, and Jacob built him a house and made booths for his cattle. That's why it's called Sukkoth or Sukkot, because Sukkot means shelters. That's where he made booths. The Feast of Booths in Israel's tradition is when they go live in the booths out in the wilderness to remember their days wandering in the wilderness, right? And therefore, the name of that place is called Sukkot, which means shelters or booths. So Jacob is heading west, which means he's heading into or toward the Jordan River, which means he's heading toward Canaan. He's heading into the promised land. He's got a vow to fulfill. He told the Lord that he would go back to Bethel if God let him out safely and brought him back to his land. But again, he deceives his brother. Verse 18, and Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, and that's key right there. He's back in the land. He's going back to his father's house. He's going to cross the Jordan into the land, back into Canaan. When he came from Paddan Aram and pitched his tent before the city, and he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father. And Hamor means as a person's name, but it means the ass. And that's interesting. But anyway, why you would name your child after a donkey is strange to me, but he did. And so Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money, and he erected there an altar and called it El Elohi Israel, or God, the God of Israel, is what that would mean if it was translated. So Jacob is no longer a wanderer. He's headed into the land, right? But think of the high price that he had to pay for his deception to get his brother his blessing. He had to leave for 20 years or more. He had to wander in the wilderness. He had to fear Laban and his brother. He feared God. But all through this, even in the midst of his deception, even in the midst of his continuing mistrust and continuing deception, as we just saw, he deceives his brother again, right? God is still keeping his promise to him. And it's not because Jacob deserves it. It's because God keeps his promises. Same is true for us. We're heading to the land, right? We've got that promise, and we're going to get there. It's not because of us, though. It's not because of our abilities. It's not because of our favor that we can earn. It's because of God keeps his promise. But anyway, Jacob settles here for a little bit. And he doesn't really go on to Bethel like he said he would in chapter 28 if he came back safely. So here's some places named by Jacob: Bethel, Manahaim, Peniel, Sukkot, and El Ohi Israel. And all of these places have meaning. And in the story of Jacob, and of course then further into the story of Israel as the nation grows. So we're a few minutes over, but that's good. We'll just save the last couple chapters, and maybe we'll finish a little bit early tonight. But so here's Jacob. He's heading back into the land. God's keeping his promises. Jacob's still learning, he's still growing, he's still maturing. And again, it's the picture of us. It's the picture of God's people. It's the picture of the nation of Israel, into the land, out of the land, deceiving and manipulating and trusting and having the blessing and growing. And that, again, that's the picture of us as God's people. God commends his love toward us in that while we're yet sinners, Christ died for us. It's not because, right? It's not because of the mandrakes. It's not because of the present that you can buy God's appeasement with. It's not because of, whatever else we can try to manipulate God into doing. It's because God keeps his promises that Jacob is heading back into the land. And that is where the true grace is. Jacob tried to buy grace, but God doesn't sell it. He only gives it. Right? Questions, comments, concerns, compliments, all the above, please feel free. My dad has the microphone.
Down 7 times.
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking I might be. I don't know if I'm right or not regarding that. Isn't that when the Muslims bow to Muhammad, they bow 7 times before they pray?
I don't know.
That
That would make
know about
sense.
that.
Eastern culture, yeah, Middle Eastern culture.
Okay, that's a question. Anyway, the second thought is this land that Jacob bought now in Canaan, etc. Isn't that under controversy now with the Palestinians, them trying to take over? And they say they owned it before, but Jacob paid the
The
price.
land that he just bought in Shechem?
Yeah, he legally bought it, so it should be his. But I think Palestinians are saying it doesn't belong to them. It doesn't belong to Jacob or Israel.
Yeah. Whether or not you would see business transactions lasting forever is
Right.
an interesting philosophy, right?
Okay, thanks.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah. Jacob died, and once he died, perhaps that means he loses his, I don't know.
I think is what Scott just said. Business transactions don't last forever. And with wars and all kinds of things happening in this property, if you, these pieces of property, they have exchanged hands, turned over countless times in history. I think the reason why the property belongs goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, Genesis chapter 15. That was God's promise. God promised that piece of property to these people, and it doesn't really matter who bought it along the way. God said, in the end, it will be the children of Israel's forever. That's his promise to them. Okay, somebody else? Anybody else? All right, you ready for a break, Scott?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right, let's do that. We've got some coffee tonight, and Don Everybody, let's get started. Get yourself situated, and we'll be on our way. Scott, it's all yours.
All right. Let me set my timer. And I've got feedback that people are excited to end early tonight, so I'll set my timer for a little bit shorter time. No, I'm just kidding. So we'll set it for, it's 7:15, we'll say 40 minutes from now. Wait, that wouldn't be short. Oh well. If you're available after to help stack chairs, Daniel Shea, Pastor Kern is making a request for all available and able bodies. We do not discriminate based on gender, age, or no. So, anybody able to stick out after, help stack chairs, that would be great. So let's continue with the story of Jacob. And we have 2 chapters to go and about 60 verses. So if we do a verse a minute, we'll be done in an hour. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so we left off with Jacob settling in a place called Shalem, a city of Shechem. Shechem is I believe the proper interpretation here is that Shechem is a person rather than a region or something like that. So we're going to learn, we're going to meet Shechem here briefly. But Jacob came in peace to Shechem, to Shalem, a city of Shechem. And that right there, Shalem is the same word that means, right, shalom, right? The same consonants, S and L and M. Salam, right? Salim, shalom, they all basically mean the same thing, peace. Peace. So Jacob came in peace, but he's going to leave not in peace. And he came to a city of Shechem, where he bought some land, settled down for a little bit, and he built an altar there, and called it God, the God of Israel. Now, a few things. Jacob builds an altar. He's going to be told by God in a little bit to go to Bethel to build an altar. So this is, Jacob building an altar here might not actually be a good thing. According to the way reading the narrative, it might actually be problematic. Because he promised God, he said, if you'll bring me safely back to my father's house, which means Bethel, right? Bring me safely back to Bethel. He said that in chapter 28, right? Then you'll be my God, and so on. So calling it Elohi Israel is important because God, that means God, the God of Israel. But it was at Bethel where he said God would be my God. So he's supposed to actually go back to Bethel, and where God will tell him to build the altar. So Jacob comes in peace to this city, settles down among some people known as the Hivites, right? And some pretty tough times come on Jacob's family, or Israel's family here. So should Jacob have settled down here? Why did he settle here and not continue on to Bethel? Is the question that we should be asking. Genesis 34, number 1, verse 1. And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, right? We were made aware of Dinah's presence. She's a daughter of Leah, as we're told there. And she was born after the 6 sons. And, right, typically in ancient history around this time, you didn't talk about daughters, right? It just, you didn't, right? And so it's important here that we're talking about Dinah, the daughter. Dan, whose son is Dan? I forget. That's one of the handmaid's son. But Dan means judgment. Dinah is the feminine version of that, which also means judgment or vindication. So it's interesting. There's irony being set up here. Jacob's coming in peace, and his daughter, judgment, right, goes out. And she went out, in verse 1, went out to see, right? She went out to inspect, to observe, to see, right? What's she interested in here? What does she want? Right? They've moved, and she wants to see the daughters of the land. And so, Shechem, verse 2, the son of Hamor, the ass, or the donkey, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her. He took her forcefully. The term there, took, is a forceful term. It's the same word that's used in Genesis 6 of the sons of God seeing and taking the daughters of men. And he lay with her and defiled her. Forced himself onto her in a sexual way. If you remember Sarah and Rebekah, Abraham said to Sarah, say you're my sister, because I don't know what they're going to do. You know, they might kill me because of you, right? Rebekah had similar situation. It was kind of true for Abraham, but not really true for Isaac. And so we see in this culture that there is a culture that women are not viewed, well, and it's like if you see a woman you want, you go take that woman and kill the man if you want her. But this is a girl who's not married. There's no man in the way, so he takes her, lays with her, defiles her, right? But very interestingly, his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. That's typically not the response of somebody who is sexually assaulting a woman. Even today, most sexual assaults, or many, end up in cases of murder. Right? But this is interesting. His soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. And he loved the damsel, and he spake kindly to the damsel. The word kindly there, literally in Hebrew, he spoke to her heart. He whispered sweet nothings into her ear. Right, and this has led people to believe that perhaps Dinah was okay with the situation. So some people actually interpret this as Dinah actually consented. But again, that's probably not the proper interpretation here. And so it's interesting that Shechem cleaves to her. You see in Genesis chapter 2, a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave unto his wife. They two shall become one flesh. Well, Shechem's got it reversed. He's got the one flesh part first, and then the cleaving. And so it's a case of defilement. He's brought pollution into the family of Jacob. And Shechem spake unto his father Hamor, saying, he sounds sort of like Jacob here himself, get me this damsel to wife, right? He said to Laban, give me my wives, or my wife, all right? And so a key principle is raised up in the history of Israel's religious and theology, right? Intermarriage with the Canaanites. Abraham said to the servant, go and get a daughter for my son Isaac, not of the Canaanites. So intermarriage with pagans, essentially, with, I guess maybe we would say Gentiles today, right, was forbidden in Israel. And you see that in Joshua, you see that in Ezra, right? Ezra says, if you don't divorce your foreign wives, you're excommunicated, basically. So the idea of intermarriage in Israel was forbidden. And anyway, so Shechem says to his father, I want to have this girl for a wife. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. How he heard, we don't know. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. Literally, Jacob did nothing. He was silent about it. Is this a lapse in Jacob's leadership as the father of the household? Because as we see, Jacob's sons are the one who are going to take over the situation. Why does Jacob hold his peace? Why does he do nothing? When Joseph was murdered, right? When his Jacob's sons and said, Joseph's dead, the animals ate him, what's his response? Man, he gets angry, right? He gets upset. But here, his daughter, she's defiled, and he holds his peace, right? Probably not the right response for a father. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out unto Jacob to commune with him. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved. So contrast the son's reaction versus Jacob's reaction. He holds his peace. His sons are grieved. They're led to emotional pain, which leads to anger, and they were very wroth. The similar language is used in Genesis 6 when God sees the sin. His heart is grieved, and he's going to destroy the earth. Because he had wrought folly in Israel, a Canaanite had wrought folly in Israel, a Canaanite had wrought immorality in Israel, a Canaanite had defiled Israel. Right? And you see this picture starting to develop that will develop all through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. The Canaanites defile Israel. And they defiled him in lying with Jacob's daughter, Dinah. Which thing ought not to be done? Here's some commentary by the narrator. Right? When Rebekah deceived Isaac, there's no commentary. This thing should not be done. When Jacob steals the blessing, there's no commentary. This thing should not be done. Right? But here there's some commentary. This ought not to be done in Israel. This defilement. And Hamor communed with them, saying, The soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you, give her him to wife. What's missing from this statement? There's no apology. Hamor doesn't apologize for his son's behavior. It's just, it's another day at the office. And he says, And make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters, well, as far as we know, Jacob only had one, Dinah, unto us, and take our daughters unto you. Again, here's this idea of intermarriage. And notice what follows. And ye shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you, and you shall dwell and trade therein, and get you possessions therein. What is Hamor offering Jacob? He's offering him wives for their sons, so they can have children. He's offering them land. He's offering them prosperity in the land. What's Hamor offering? He's trying to offer Jacob the blessing that God has already given to Jacob. Jacob's already rich. He's already got a large family. He's already got the land. It's already given to him. Hamor is promising this to him. Right? And so here's a picture of the world promising you the blessing that you can have outside of God's blessing. Very interesting picture. And so Hamor makes the deal. And then Shechem follows his father. and said unto her father and unto her brethren, Let me find grace in your eyes, and what ye shall say unto me I will give. Ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as ye shall say unto me. But give me the damsel to wife. Whatever you want, I will pay. The dowry goes to Jacob. The gift is the thing that goes to the wife, right? And so he's saying, I'll do anything. He loves her so much, he'll do anything. Right? Here's an opportunity for Jacob to get rich again. Right? But what happens is interesting. And the sons of Jacob, notice the sons of Jacob. Jacob doesn't answer. The sons of Jacob, the sons of the supplanter, answered. Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully, and said, Because he had defiled Dinah, their sister, and they said unto him, We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised. Right? Going back to the covenant sign given to Abraham. For that were a reproach unto us. That's disgraceful to us. But in this will we consent unto you, if ye will be as we are, that every male of you be circumcised. Become like us. Get circumcised. Then we will give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters unto us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. Well, remember, they answered them deceitfully. But if ye will not hearken unto us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughters, and we will be gone. Our daughter, and we will be gone. So the deal is made. Shechem said, Whatever you ask, I'll do. He probably didn't have this in mind. It's my guess. He probably had some sort of economic symbol in mind, such as sheep or goats or money or property, right? Not circumcision. And so they make the deal. And not only this, it's not that Shechem has to be circumcised, it's that every male of you, every male who lived there. Whoa. If you don't do this, we're going to take our daughter and we're going to leave. What would you expect these guys to say? Dude, seriously, come on. We're grown men. Come on. No, this is not how it's going to work. What do they say in verse 18? And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. What? These were good words to them. Just get circumcised, every one of you. Oh. And the young man deferred not to do the thing. He wasted no time. He's excited. He must really love this girl because he had delight in Jacob's daughter. Now remember Dinah, her name means judgment. So maybe you read it this way. Because Shechem had delight in judgment. Ooh, right? After reading this a few times, you're thinking, wow, this is what's coming. Oh boy. And he was more honorable than all the house of his father. This little parenthetical statement is given because he's going to need the influence to be able to persuade all the other men to get circumcised. So he's a very important man, and he's going to need the influence. And so, verse 20, And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came unto the gate of their city and communed with the men of the city, saying, the gate of the city is where the important business took place. It's like the town hall, I guess, might be a good example today. The gate of the city, where all the leaders and elders gather. And they say to them, These men are peaceable with us. Right? Jacob didn't do anything. He held his peace. He bought land and held his peace when his daughter was defiled. These men are peaceable with us. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade therein. For the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us be circumcised, as they are circumcised. Shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Ooh. Now here's the plan. Here's the deceit of the Canaanites. They see the opportunity here is to gain from them, not to become one people, but to absorb them and take them in and make Israel like the Hivites, make Israel like the Canaanites, make God's people like the world, by absorbing them in and having daily interactions and marrying and trading and so on. Notice they did not mention Dinah, right? They didn't say, Shechem didn't say, I'm really in love with this girl and let's do this because I want to marry her, right? So that wasn't even mentioned. So there's some ulterior motives even with the Shechem and Hamor as they talk to their own people. There's deception there. They're not telling the whole story, right? And they really want to just absorb Israel and his substance. Right? So there's just deceit here going around. There's deceit between Jacob's sons. There's deceit between Hamor and Shechem. And what happens? They're peaceful. They're peaceful, right? Yeah. No. 24. And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened all. They all listened that went out of the gate of the city. And every male was circumcised. All that went out of the gate of his city. All, every, all. I mean, the emphasis is that everyone did it. Right? They agreed. They thought it was a great deal. 25. And it came to pass on the third day, following the surgery, when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, these are Dinah's full brothers. They're daughter or sons of Leah, just as Dinah is a daughter of Leah. Took each man his sword. Remember, they're peaceful. And came upon the city boldly and slew all the males. And they slew Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword. And they took Dinah out of Shechem's house. Why Dinah is there? I guess some say they never returned her. Others say it's because they got married because they got circumcised. So they did the deal. So they took Dinah. They went out. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their sheep and their oxen and their asses and that which was in the city and that which was in the field and all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives they took captive and spoiled even all that was in the house. Do you get the picture? All of it. All the men were circumcised. All the men were slaughtered. The city was plundered. The wives were taken. The peaceful men who came into the city, who Shechem and Hamor said, oh, we'll just have all their stuff. The reverse happens. No, they won't. They don't get the stuff. Jacob's sons get the stuff. And Jacob said unto Simeon and Levi, Ye have troubled me to make me to stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and Perizzites. Well, Jacob, you didn't lead your sons. And I, being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me. Here's Jacob fearing again, and they'll slay me. Jacob goes back to fear, and I shall be destroyed, and I and my house. If you read the blessing that Jacob gives his sons in Genesis 49, Simeon and Levi really passed over because of their bloodshed here. So the scriptures don't praise what they did. Even Jacob says, you've just made me to stink among the inhabitants of the land. If that's not true still today, in a sense, wow, that's just amazing. And they said, the sons, should he deal with our sister as a harlot? There's deception, there's deceit, there's treachery, there's defilement. Why? Because Jacob didn't go on to Bethel. Jacob didn't keep going when he should have. Jacob held his peace. Jacob's sons are the ones who respond to Hamor and Shechem. Jacob doesn't lead, and so his family gets into trouble. Jacob's daughter is raped, but then Jacob's sons rape the Hivites. There's so many different things that take place in this chapter. The picture of Jacob entering the land, and there's the conflict with the dwellers from the beginning. Right? There's a foreshadowing of the Canaan conquest in this chapter under Joshua and Moses. Intermarriage with the Canaanites is forbidden, another common theme here. Blessing doesn't come from the Canaanites or anyone else but God. Hamor tried to offer the blessing, but he can't. It comes from God. Jacob's sons take leadership roles. Their father didn't step up. The 12 tribes of Israel begin to take shape. The Canaanites bring defilement and dishonesty to Israel. Circumcision is the mark of the covenant community, we're reminded. Jacob's sons deal deceitfully like Jacob himself. His own children must learn to trust God, even as they see their father fail in his leadership. Conflict with the Canaanites and the conquering of Canaan, as I said, is foreshadowed. Israel becomes a stench in the eyes of the land dwellers and bears constant retaliation forward from here. And what we see is that those who bless Israel are blessed, and those who curse Israel are cursed. So a lot of themes developed in this one story of Dinah and her defilement. And let's go on to the last chapter. This is the last chapter. This is the closing of the Jacob story. Although Jacob is still present in Genesis from here, it's the end of, remember we started with Isaac. These are the sons of Isaac. This is the line of Isaac, and now the death of Isaac follows here. So the story of Isaac is really the story of Jacob. And we'll see that comes to a close with Isaac's death at the end of the chapter. But in this chapter, 3 deaths are recorded, and 1 sin, the sin of Reuben. And each one of the deaths and the sin, they follow a movement. Jacob moves from one place to another, and then it takes place. So there's 4 movements in the chapter. But what we see here is that the blessing, even though the new generation is coming, even though there's still sin in Israel's family, and Jacob really isn't being called Israel at this point, but he will be called Israel in this chapter. Right? So it's bringing everything to a conclusion. There's death, and there's Jacob's name is really becoming Israel now. The sons are mentioned, all 12 of them, so the 12 tribes. So everything's kind of wrapping up in this chapter. So it's really a conclusion to the life of Isaac and, of course, Jacob. Verse 1, and God said unto Jacob, while he's still in Shechem, embarrassed, fearful, living among these people who his sons have murdered. And God said unto Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel. 10 years have gone by since Jacob returned from Padan Aram. 10 years. It's taken him 10 years to fulfill his vow to go back to Bethel. He needs the prompting of God to keep his vow. And arise, go up to Bethel, And literally they have to go up. It's about 1,000-foot incline from where they are. They've crossed from Peniel over the Jordan into Shechem. Right now they got to continue on to Bethel. And make there an altar in verse 1. So God commands Jacob to build an altar. Jacob built an altar in Shechem, in Shalem, but now God is saying, I want you to build the altar in Bethel. So God says, make an altar there, and then, and interesting, it says, the God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. Why does God have to tell Jacob which God to build an altar to? Why does God clarify himself? What's going on in Jacob's life? He failed in leadership. Right? 10 years have passed since he's going to his vow. Right? Jacob in need of a revival. Jacob's family is in need of a revival. They're in need of spiritual renewal and growth. Then Jacob said unto his household and to all that were with him. And here we get it. Here we see the beginning of the change. And he's been transformed. He's called Israel. Now we see him really taking shape. Put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean. Change your garments. Let us arise and go up to Bethel, to the house of God, and I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. And so we see that Jacob has allowed idolatry to infiltrate his family. Rachel, she brought the gods with her when she left her father. Apparently Jacob never did anything with that. When they plundered the city there, they probably took gods from the people there. So they're a picture of Israel here. It's a picture of Israel leadership in the future, where the kings who did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord tore down the high places. And the kings that did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord built up the high places. So there's a leadership role here that needs to be filled, a spiritual leadership role where God will be God, or the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob will be God of the family. And so there's this need of revival. There's the pictures of ritual purity, being clean, washing, the changing of garments, pictures transformation of the people. How do you approach God? How do you go up to Bethel? How do you go up to the house of God? You got to be clean. Verse 4, and they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and all their earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. Why it says hid and not buried, I'm not sure. Why? I haven't really found, or I haven't, maybe some of you have an idea, but is there a meaning here in why Jacob only hid them instead of just burying them, in the sense of putting them to death in their burial? But he hides them instead. I'm not sure. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were round about them, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. Right, so here we have a picture of Jacob taking spiritual leadership, getting rid of the gods, and God goes with them. The protection of God goes with them. I see here a foreshadowing of the pillar of fire and the cloud by day and by night, the terror of God going before them. And so there's no pursuit of the enemies of Israel. In verse 6, so Jacob came to Luz, which we know Bethel. Jacob renamed it Bethel. Jacob's name has been changed to Israel as well, which is in the land of Canaan. Again, that's key. He's in the land. That is Bethel. And he and all the people that were with him. And he built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, which means the God of Bethel, because their God had appeared unto him when he'd fled from the face of his brother. But Deborah, and here's the first death recorded. So there's the movement from this part into Bethel, and then there's this record of the death of Deborah. Well, who's Deborah? Deborah's Rebekah's nurse? Wait a second. Why are we learning about the death of Rebekah's nurse and not the death of Rebekah? Do we ever learn about the death of Rebekah? But that's very interesting. So Deborah, who was introduced in chapter 24, Rebekah, the nurse, Rebekah's nurse went with Rebekah when when she was taken to be Isaac's wife in chapter 24. So we meet her there. But my guess is she's mentioned because she's all that's left of Jacob to remember his mother by. Remember, she said, "Go, it'll only be a few days. It'll only be a few days." When they never meet again. And Deborah's all Jacob has to remember his mother by. And she must have been very old at this point. And she was buried beneath Bethel under an oak, and the name of it was called Allon Bakuth, or Oak of Weeping. There's the first death. So things are starting to change in the family. It's a new generation coming around. And God appeared unto Jacob again when he went out of Padan Aram and blessed him. God said unto him, "Thy name," and here's a renewal of God's changing his name. God tells him his name's changed in the land now. And Jacob, "Thy name is Jacob, thy name shall not be called anymore Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name." Again, God reminds him of his transformation of who he is. And he called his name Israel. Verse 11, "And God said unto him, I am God Almighty," or El Shaddai. "Be fruitful and multiply, and a nation and a company of nations shall be of thee." God renews the covenant promise. "And kings shall come out of thy loins. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee I will give it, and thy seed, and to thy seed after thee will I give the land." So the blessing is given. There's a revival in Jacob's family. God reminds him of who is God and who will be their God. And God, again, there's no fear here either. Remember, Jacob met God and there was fear, but again, there's no fear mentioned. God went up from the place where he talked with him, and Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him. He responds in almost the same exact way he responded the first time God met him at Bethel. "Even a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering thereon and poured oil thereon, and Jacob called the name of the place that God spake with him, Bethel." One of Jacob's part of his vow was that I would go back to Bethel, but also that he would pay tithes. Right? And there's no mention of ever paying tithes, but offering something on the altar, I wonder if that is maybe the idea behind it of tithes. Number 16, "And they journeyed from Bethel," so now they leave again. They're going to make another journey, and we're going to come up with another death. "And there was but a little way to come to Ephrath, and Rachel travailed." She got pregnant again. And she prayed to God, named her first son Joseph, which means "may he add." And so God is answering her prayer. "And she had hard labor, and it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said unto her, Fear not, thou shalt have this son also." God is reminding her that he's going to answer her prayer, and she's going to have this son. "And it came to pass, as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoni, which means son of my suffering, or son of suffering. But his father called him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand." So Rachel dies, but Benjamin is born, and that completes the 12 sons. Now there's the 12 tribes. So there's the full family. Son of my right hand, some people understand that right hand could also mean the idea of south in it. So where they're traveling south. So Jacob is maybe trying to remind himself not of the suffering, but of where they're headed. And what's interesting, Rachel dies, and she's buried in the way to Ephrath in verse 19, which is in Bethlehem. So we learn what Ephrath is. It's Bethlehem. "And Jacob set up a pillar upon her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day." What's interesting here? There was a name there was a name given for Deborah, Rebekah's nurse. But Jacob doesn't name the place here. There's no naming of the place where Rachel dies. But the son is born, and he's given a name. So I wonder if there's any significance there. Maybe you can tell me. In verse 21, and here we see that Jacob is now called Israel. And Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Adar, and it came to pass, when Israel dwelt in the land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. He doesn't do anything about it, but he will in Genesis 49. In fact, Reuben actually lost the birthright because of it, his activity. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. Now here we have the completion of the family. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and Simeon and Levi and Judah and Issachar and Zebulun, the sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin, and the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, Dan and Naphtali, and the sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, and notice they're mentioned in order of importance. And Leah's handmaid, Gad, Asher. These are the sons of Jacob, which were born to him in Padan Aram. Of course, Benjamin is the exception. And Jacob came unto Isaac his father at Mamre, unto the city of Arba, which is in Hebron. So again, here's a traveling, and there's another death. And where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. And the days of Isaac were 180 years, 180 years, and he gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. There it is. Jacob and Esau are united. Jacob's in the land. He has the blessing. He's got the family. He has the wealth. And a new generation is come on. An old generation is passing away. And now you'll head on. The next chapter, chapter 36, is all about Esau's family line or lineage. Right? And so this unit of Jacob's life was sandwiched between, I believe, Ishmael's line and now Esau's line as well. And then it will go on to talk about Joseph and Joseph's time in Egypt. So there we have it. We've come to the end of the story of Jacob, although Jacob is still, of course, present in the next coming chapters. But that's where I stop. My dad can take it from there and hope he does as good a job as I did. But anyway, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry, I just scratched my back a little bit. Jacob is a man of mixed motives. He's a man who needs to grow. He's a man just like us. Tries to earn favor, tries to manipulate, tries to get the blessing his own way. But amidst all of that, amidst his failures, he stayed faithful. And that's really the key about his life. And I take it for our lives as well. Amidst our failures, stay faithful. And make God your God. Questions, comments, concerns, compliments?
Thank you. Scott, I was wondering in verse 16, I was noticing that there's one will we and three we wills. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that as far as like the three I wills of Satan, or as a willful act,
And
kind of a willful act there.
Which chapter are you talking about?
34, I'm sorry.
34?
Yeah. It's 34:16.
The three wills.
Yeah, there's one we will.
Then we will give our daughters unto you, and we
Yeah,
will take
so-
your daughters, and we will
says-
dwell with you, and we will
says
become
we
one
will,
people.
and then it says will we, and then there's three
Oh,
we
we-
will.
will we,
So
yeah.
we will take, we will dwell, and we will become one people.
Yeah.
That's kind of stood out to me when I was reading that, and I was like,
And where were you connecting it? You said to
well, I was thinking of the three I wills of Satan. You know, it's kind of a
three I
kind
wills
of-
of Satan. You mean?
yeah, it's kind of a
in,
kind of a sinful thing.
it's
there,
Isaiah?
kind of a willful
I will,
thing.
yeah.
they had some bad feelings in their heart. They were kind of moving it into sin with that. So I was looking at that and I was like, kind of a satanic touch there. So I was
Yeah,
like,
certainly the deception and the trying to do things their way outside of God's blessing.
They were, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
The other thing that I was looking at was where, let's see, where he was telling them about their strange gods in 35, verse 2. And I was thinking about when Lot was trying to convince his daughters and their husbands to leave Sodom and Gomorrah, and I was like, maybe he got the same attitude from them that Lot did. And I was looking at it when it says he hid them under the oak tree. It kind of sounds like as if he didn't want them to see him do that. So he was kind of sneaking out there to
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about it that way.
get that done, and they wouldn't see where they were being
Yeah,
hid.
so he hid them so they wouldn't know where he put them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they couldn't go back and get
Yeah.
them or find where they
That's a
were.
good way of looking at it.
Just some thoughts.
But yeah, I mean, just the failure of leadership in Israel to stay faithful to the covenant, right? And making God their God and making the Lord their God. Yeah.
There was definitely a serious lack
Yeah.
of leadership there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, yeah, that pictures again what happens in Israel time and time again, and in our lives time and time again, right? Next series will be on idols, or is that down low, secretive? You can't tell anybody.
It's
that.
coming. It's coming.
Okay. So we have our own idols, don't we? Yeah. IRAs and
First off,
401k. Oh, sorry.
I have a different answer for that with why he hid them
Okay.
and did not bury them. He hid them so he could probably get back at them. Yeah, because that's
Yeah.
how the flesh is. That's what you would do, right? Yes, exactly. But that's not.
And it's not without importance that he hid him under an oak tree, because oak trees were seen as sacred places in those days as well. So
Yeah, I could be wrong.
no, I don't think. I think
Yeah.
it's valid. I
Check.
think it's definitely valid.
And to move on, chapter 34, you had mentioned there were many tensions. You've talked about the tensions before, and a number. Each chapter has so many tensions. So you could call this a chapter of tensions.
Sure.
And do you know how many there are in 34?
I don't.
Okay. And then
Did
one
you count
more.
them?
One more thing.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me.
No.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no, I don't. I didn't count them. There's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt.
And Rebecca is the reason that Jacob was the way he was. I think, again, the flesh.
The apple
we'll
doesn't
do
fall
that.
far from the tree.
Yeah, possibly. Again, I could be wrong.
Oh, he certainly learned it from his. And again, there's a failure in leadership because Isaac never went and got wives for his son Esau like Abraham did for Isaac. So you see the failure of leadership over and over and over again.
You mentioned in chapter 35 that there's no record of Jacob paying his tithe.
Yeah.
Do you suppose that the deaths were God taking his tithe?
I see the death. I didn't think about it that way, but that's interesting.
Thank you, Fran. Somebody else? Kind of in the middle of you all here. Just, you want to ask a question, Raja? A second.
What would have been the correct godly response for Jacob and his family regarding Dinah's circumstance?
Yeah, what would have been the correct?
Yeah, and dealing with the people, dealing with the rape.
Well, the law in Sinai comes along and has stipulations for those sorts of things. But certainly the response to slew all the males seems excessive, but then taking it and plundering the city and taking all of that, again, is excessive. So, Yeah, I don't know what would have been the proper response. I don't know.
I can offer an opinion. I think you're right. I think what happened was excessive. But you said the word took her, defiled her. He raped her. That's what happened. He didn't use that word, but that's rape. You go in a lot of the things that happen in Genesis, the penalties, although they haven't been given in the law doesn't show up until Exodus. Many of the justified penalties in the law can be read back into the book of Genesis for offenses there. So I would say, my guess would be, whatever the penalty for rape was under the Old Testament law would have been probably justified by Jacob in his sons, probably Jacob first, on Shechem and what he did to Dinah. That would be my guess. I think that would be safe to say. Should have killed him anyway.
Circumcision in God's eyes, it's so important.
Say that again.
Why the circumcision in God's eyes was so important?
Why is circumcision? Because it was part of the covenant with Abraham, all right? And that goes way back into a lesson back in like chapter 16 or whatnot. But that is in your notes. There is a whole, well, you don't have your notes? Well, then we'll get you some. But it is written in the notes, going back to where circumcision is discussed in the notes, okay? All right, somebody else? Yes.
But in the New Testament, you have the circumcise your hearts, right? So you have an initial theology developed, but it develops into the circumcision of the heart, which is the real important thing, which is the sign of the covenant with us, is the circumcised heart, right? So, yeah.
He's speaking figuratively, just so you understand that.
Yes.
Figuratively speaking in the
Right,
New Testament as opposed to literally speaking in the Old Testament.
Knife out here and
Yes. Do you understand what that means? Figuratively, it's like a parable or an allegory or something. It's not literal, actual cutting. It's spoken of like a cutting of the Old Testament, okay?
You know, I'm upset myself regarding Jacob and his silence during this whole Dinah situation.
yep.
He just stepped back and just let nothing happen, man, like it was nothing. He was supposed to be the leader of the family? I don't know. He wasn't wake up yet. He didn't wake up yet.
And in part of the circumcision, when God made the covenant with Abraham, the phrase is God cut a covenant. It's a cutting of a covenant. He goes through and he cuts the animals in half. And so the picture of the animals being cut in half is like, if I don't keep my side of the promise, this is what should happen to me. God is saying I should be cut in half myself. So it's a symbol that goes with the men of God's seriousness of his promises, is kind of really what it looks to. Yeah. So there's nothing, right, just like baptism doesn't save us, circumcision didn't save them. Looks toward what God promises.
Raja asked the question, did God really talk to those people?
Did God really talk to them?
That's what she asked, yes.
That's what it says. I think God still speaks to people. I mean, you know, I'm not, this is a whole, you know, of course you get into a debate, you know, but we have the Spirit of God, right, that, and through the Word communicates with us. But there's stories of people in the Muslim world where they have dreams, and God, and there's stories that are legitimate stories where God, they have a real experience of God telling them things and revealing himself to them. So in our scientific Western mind, you know, but God doesn't work through scientific Western thinking. So.
We're going to be talking about Joseph. You will see God speaking through dreams. He is the dreamer of the Bible, Joseph. All right. Anybody else have a question? Question? Yes.
It's not a real question, you probably can't answer, but why did Reuben go in onto his father's concubine. And do
Because
what he-
Reuben is like Esau. He can't control himself.
Oh, that figures.
And he's the
Pretty
firstborn,
simple answer,
yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
But I don't know. Right.
Who would Esau or who would Jacob pay tithes to anyway? Or if he was going to pay tithes,
Probably the local church, I imagine.
got to get him from a member. He was pretty rich.
Yeah, I see it as offering the sacrifice on the altar as the tithe. But I don't know if anybody else sees it that way, so that could be a very unique interpretation.
Anybody else? All right, good. Scott, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And
Scott
the chairs,
spent
if you could stick around for
a
chairs,
lot of time
that would be great.
on the 3 nights that he's taught here. I know he's spent a
And
lot
if you
of time
want
in
notes,
preparing this.
again, you can email me at scott.grace@fbbc. I'll email you everything that I've written out here. But it's probably not as good as my dad's.
I really liked the summary at the end of chapter 34 that he went through there. That was excellent. The summary of all the lessons that came out of that chapter. I certainly want a copy of that myself, I know. All right, thank you, Scott. Next week we will hit chapter 36, the generations of Esau.
That's
As
your
he-
homework. You have to do that on your own.
Actually,
Oh,
you're
you
right.
want to teach it?
No, they have to memorize it. How's that?
There you go.
Memorize chapter 36. No, you don't want to do that. Anyway, but we'll start into the life of Joseph. He starts out there. He's 17 years old. You remember that story. It's really interesting, this story. And of course, although this is the end of the story of Jacob, Jacob shows up all the way almost to the end of the book of Genesis. He makes cameo appearances every now and then in that story with Joseph, but Joseph is the major patriarch. All right, we're going to go, and we need to stack chairs, Don. Where would you like us to stack them? Set them right where they are? 7 high, right where they are. Okay, wonderful. That's easy. How about the tables? Leave the tables where they are. We'll stack the chair in 7 high, right where they are. So put 1 on the bottom, 6 on top, leave them there. Let's pray, and then we'll do that, all right? Father, thank you for this great book. Thank you for the stories of these people, and we are reminded that they are written for our admonition. Lord, these stories are brought to us, true stories, for us to stop and reflect upon their attitudes and their actions, their relationships with one another and their relationships with you, their behaviors, and then, Lord, they help us evaluate our own relationship with you, our actions, our attitudes. Thank you, Lord, for these great stories and for the great promises. We're reminded in each chapter you always come through with what you said you would do. Thank you for that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, let's stack chairs, everybody.